Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Beyond the Facade. I'm Doña Junta from Swami Chronicles. Sabrina, she's on a little staycation today, so she will not be joining us. She'll be back. She's been super busy, so it's kind of been a little hectic for her. But we do have a guest today. His name is Eric Craig, and he has a YouTube channel called South LA Recap. So I want to let him introduce himself. um, Go ahead if you like to introduce yourself.
Sure thing. So, hi, I'm Eric Craig. I am a content creator, born and raised in South LA. I kind of use my talents now to kind of share some South LA history that I was very interested in, but couldn't find many resources about. So, everything on my channel is just like hidden secrets on the region that can really explain how things were and how things actually came to be and why South LA can sometimes be in a state that it is in certain aspects.
Cool. So you mentioned born and raised in South LA, which we'll talk about because some people say South Central, some people say South LA. I say South Central, but I you have great videos on a survey you did about that. So we'll talk about that in a minute. But where at in South Central were you raised? Could you kind of give us the cross streets or like the vicinity of where you're at?
Yeah, so Avalon Imperial would be the cross streets. That neighborhood would be Green Meadows, but most people probably don't refer to it by that neighborhood. That's just as much South LA, South Central, you just refer to it as the region. Um,
Right.
but yeah, that's where I grew up. That's where my grandmother lived. My grandmother and grandfather bought a house there in the 1950s, and they've
Okay.
been there. And then my family's just been a part of that neighborhood since then.
Okay, so Green Meadows neighborhood, and that's one thing that I've been just trying to pay more attention to since looking at a lot of on South Central is that there are a lot of, and you mentioned, I think you said there's 25 little neighborhoods.
Yeah, there's about 20, if my memory serves correct, somewhere around there, about 25 separate ones and about three
Yes.
unincorporated neighborhoods. Yep.
Yes. So, and it's like we don't give enough credit to these separate neighborhoods, like Green Meadows, which it sounds like a great sounding name, right? And it just kind of gets lumped into like just South Central, South LA. And maybe you could let us know later why that is. So, and what high schools did you go to when you were living there?
Sure. So I went to actually 107th Street School and I went to Samuel Gompers for middle school. For high school, I actually went in central LA. I went to small school downtown business magnets. Um,
Oh yeah, I know where that's
yeah,
at. Off Temple.
right off Temple and Beaudry, not too far from LAUSD headquarters.
Yes, I used to live near that area on Second and Beaudry, and
Mm-hmm.
I have a friend that went to that magnet school
Oh,
back in
yeah.
the days. But it's a small school that's pretty well known for like just gets kids that go to college and all that stuff. So that's awesome.
Right.
And that
Yeah.
area got really gentrified. Have you seen all the apartments around there that just blew up?
I went over there the other day. I couldn't even recognize it because there were no high-rise apartments. I
No,
graduated in 2012. There were no high-rise apartments then, and I
no.
come back and it's like the
There were empty
Orsini.
lots.
Yeah, they were empty lots, and it's like a matter of time where I kind of feel like the school might
Might be gone, right? Like
might
they
be
were like,
gone.
"Oh, this school's old. They've got to kick it out." Yeah, no, I know that area. That's it's definitely changed a lot. So, as far as were you interested in history and maybe like city, urban buildings or history as a kid, or did that develop later?
Much later. I could care less about any of that stuff. I honestly could have. That started when I graduated from college. I went to Xavier University of New Orleans, graduated, got a job as a multimedia editor and content contributor for a Black newspaper,
Okay.
then worked for Curbed, which was a Vox Media subsidiary that was about neighborhoods and architecture, learned a bunch about New Orleans. And then when I came back to LA in 2018, I kind of was like, wow, I spent a lot of time learning about New Orleans. What can I really learn about my own roots? And
Exactly.
there's some stuff you can find. A lot of it probably isn't positive. A lot of it isn't really about some of the vast history that you can find. So it wasn't until December of 2020 when I kind of like had this burning question, like, what was the difference between South LA and South Central? That ended up being a 4-part video series. And then I
Right.
started to have more questions about the history of the region. So then it really took off from there.
Okay, cool. So you went to school, were you studying anything like related, or what did you study when you went to college?
Yeah, I did political science. That was my major. Mass communication was my minor. I
Okay.
spent my summers doing political research. So I learned a lot about like creating uh, literacy reviews, about compiling data, learning about statistical significance, and then learning a lot of critical reading and writing skills. And I think the newspaper really taught me how to just kind of keep all of my knowledge um, to a condensed format that's like very easy for people to understand, share it, move on, and then draft narratives that can really help people to understand the story at hand.
So was it a newspaper that was actually like a physical paper? Was it an online publication?
Yeah, so at our school we had a physical biweekly paper. So
Okay.
twice a month it would come out, and we would write and we would design it, and we'd sit in the room editing it. It was a lot. Those are some of my best memories from college.
Yeah, no, and that's kind of the old school way, right?
Yep,
Editing the newspaper and working in newspaper. I mean, that's like last of a dying breed now, like from
definitely.
what we see. Okay, and so your parents were never incorporating history growing up or teaching you some of the stuff from LA. I know that you had the interview with your dad, but did you ever talk to them about that stuff back then, or it wasn't really prevalent?
I think some stuff were like I learned about the 92 uprising from my mom, my dad. I learned about how a lot of the neighborhood, how South LA changed immensely in the 80s, especially during the crack and substance abuse epidemic within that region in particular.
Right.
And then I look back at some of my grandmother's old pictures on the same block, Avalon and Imperial, like in the 60s, and completely different neighborhood. You'd never guess. I mean, there weren't even any iron gates on the street, which is like crazy for South LA.
Wow. So the aesthetic looked different.
Oh man, it just looked like any other suburban neighborhood,
Like
which was
open
so weird.
lawns.
You could just walk up to the door.
Yeah, I love seeing pictures like that, but it's like
Yeah,
that's not LA. Like we have
right.
gates.
And it's just like my wife, she's from Altadena. So she always thought it was the weirdest thing when she'd come down to South LA and it's like there were gates. And I'm like, how do you have a house without a gate? You just want somebody to walk up to your door. But yeah, this was like a way of life.
Oh my god, so true, so true. I grew up with iron gates and fences and trees, things covering the front door. I mean, I know what us Latinos, we have a bunch of stuff in the front yard and things covering tarps. My dad would have tarps in front of the fences. Like, why? I don't know.
Hey, privacy, you gotta have it
But it just
sometimes. And I
looked
get it.
funky, right? And it wasn't like that nice looking. But we had bars too, and I didn't grow up in South LA, but it was just like a thing in the hood, I guess.
Right, right.
Okay, so there was some, feedback from your parents. So they actually grew up in born and raised in South Central or South LA.
Yep. So my mom was born and raised same neighborhood. She went to 107th Gompers, Locke. My dad, in that case, so my biological dad grew up South LA, sort of like the Vermont Normandy area.
Uh huh.
Um, and then Charles, the dad I mentioned, he's my
Mm-hmm.
stepdad. He's from Jamaica, but then
Okay.
moved to LA in the 80s, and then pretty much immediately based in South LA.
Okay. So there's some. I'm just curious, did your parents or stepfather know about the history of Central when you did that video? Or because I know, like, a lot of times, even the people don't really know the history until it's been, presented. And even people that grew up there don't really know much about it. But they know about that era?
No, it's funny. All of my videos, it's always like new stuff to them. And I
Yeah.
think a lot of it is like we, as a community, we just didn't take a moment to stop and reflect and
Right.
talk about it. And that's like very important to prevent a lot of these mistakes and a lot of these like losses from happening again in the future.
No, absolutely. So yeah. So that's it's even more important why the content you're making is even teaching the older folks about this history, right?
Right.
And in a different way that it's not boring and what probably will not be taught in school so much. I don't know about nowadays. Maybe they're more open. I don't know. But then again, the schools might be they have their textbooks they're using, and I'm not sure if they're going to be
Mhm.
having the real history of LA in some of those textbooks when
No.
you have a school in LA, but we're not learning about it.
Right. This isn't anything you'd find on a standardized test, but I learned from someone, I think I was on a tour in Santa Barbara, and he said something to me. This was in 2021, so I was still like kind of fresh with the recap. And he was like, the best way to get kids to learn about their history is to talk about what's right next to them. And I was like, I probably would have paid more attention in history class if I
Yeah.
felt like there was something more adjacent to me.
No, that's so true. I have said before in high school and it was boring. Like history was boring because it was kind of the same. It was just something unrelatable. It wasn't until college where I took Mexican American history, where it got like something more interesting. Oh wow, I didn't know that about my own history. And then even then it was limited, and it wasn't until I did my own reading where I learned for myself. So yeah, I totally could see how that's lacking, and probably still is. And you said that you got inspired because you didn't find the own history in your own city. But I did see that you had some videos from like 6 years ago. Was that from like when you were in college doing that, or because I see one with your sister, or were you trying to do a different type of channel at one point, or
Yeah.
was it similar?
So I just, in retrospect, I kind of wish I would have made like a whole new channel. Like if I would have
Uh-huh.
known. When I started the recap, I actually did not think I would be doing it this long. I thought, okay, I'm going to try this out. It's probably going to fail and no one's going to subscribe and it will be
Everybody thinks that. Everybody thinks
done.
that.
So I was like, oh, okay. So, and I was like, well, I'm going to put it on my personal channel. I'm like, if the worst comes to worst, I have a couple of videos that I can kind of put on my CV or whatever. Like, hey, look, I did something with my time. But yeah, I had that channel. I have like some other like short films I just never took off because they just kind of reminded me like why I do what I do. I
Hmm.
really love film. I've always loved it. I've been doing it since high school at Downtown Magnets. That's where I had my first film class. Miss Andrea Hayes was the teacher that introduced me to film, and that was
Hmm.
like the first class that I like actually really loved in school. And
Yes.
yeah, so I just keep them there because I'm like, oh, well, I've always said I wanted to be a filmmaker. And these were like some of the steps that I took before I kind of went down this route. So I just always kind of wanted to keep those around.
Yeah, and whenever I interview people, I dig into their old stuff, and usually it's the same way. Like they start off with a personal YouTube or a personal Instagram, and it's not really, much. Maybe it's personal pictures or something, and until later you see the development of the channel and the interest they got into. So it's kind of cool to see like the old, like oh, how it changed, right? But you mentioned so the political science was the major, and then you said mass communications and broadcasting.
Yeah, mass
Or
communications. Probably I took a couple of broadcasting classes,
or
but yeah,
okay,
just
is
like
that a same thing as journalism?
I think in a sense, mass communication like covers everything from like broadcast to online media to journal to like just written journalism. So it's like something that's very wide
Hmm.
reaching.
Okay, so you did have the interest of film within that to be a filmmaker. Or is that something that you're still in pursuit of, or obviously you're doing it with this, but like as far as maybe going to another level with it?
Oh, yeah. I would that is probably my dream. It
Yeah.
often times feels like a distant dream. Um, but other days I remind myself I'm living it now. It might not be as big as my dreams kind of had it, but like I make films, people watch them and people appreciate them. So
Yep.
that really means a lot to me at its core.
Yeah, no, that makes sense because you're doing it on your own terms right now.
Mhm.
And again, that's something maybe 20, 30 years ago we didn't have that opportunity to do, but now we can. So if you do get to that further step, great, but you're still feeding that interest now, so that's awesome. So the way I found your channel was because I was doing the some research on the history of Central Avenue, and yours popped up. Like there was, I mean, there were some videos on there, but one of yours were the most, I think, engaging. Some were kind of like dry, boring, but yours was engaging. And you broke it down pretty well. So that's how I found out about you. And then I tried to search for the page, and I'd seen that Hood Historian was also in connection with you. I don't know if you guys know each other, but so I'm like, the history circle from Instagram was kind of there. I was like, oh, okay, so everybody's kind of in the same niche in some way, right? That's how I found your page from the Dunbar. Um, so you're saying that because when I go back to your timeline, it's the channel started about a year ago, or is it 2 years now?
About a year and a half, December 2020.
Okay. And the pandemic had nothing to do with starting your channel, like being, because I know for me that kind of was like being bored, like and like, okay, I want to do this now. It's time.
I think the pandemic really allowed me to slow down
Uh
and
huh.
to do something like this where I actually had the time and the space and the energy, even sleeping like 8.5 hours a day,
Yeah.
um, to like kind of pursue it. So even as like life kind of picked up this post mid pandemic fiasco that we're in now,
And
I
you
like
got married during the pandemic,
yeah, I got married during the pandemic
so
too.
there's a
That
lot
was
going on.
yeah, I got married before I started the recap. I don't think I could have done both.
I know that's a busy time, right? Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, that was October 2020. So December 2020, I just wanted I had still a burning desire to like create projects, and I've always sort of created projects. I think the
Hmm.
only different thing about the recap is like I'm still doing it.
Right.
Um, I've done like podcasts before, they don't stick. I've done a satirical magazine. I thought I wanted to be a satirical writer, and it didn't really stick. But this was different.
So you done podcasts are based on a similar interest, or was it a totally different topic?
Oh, totally different. In fact, the recap is the first time that I've kind of dealt with like nonfiction,
Okay.
which it turns out that I actually like that the most. I kind of forced myself to think like, oh, I like film, so I must like creating nonfiction. I don't even like reading nonfiction. I mean, I don't even like. I'm a filmmaker and I want to create fiction, but I don't even like reading fiction. I don't. I read
Yeah,
nonfiction. I
me
read a
too.
lot, but it's like so yeah. I think that's another reason why it sticks. It's like nonfiction, and I'm a very kind of like to the point person. So
Uh-huh.
I like information, I like to learn it, and I like to apply it. And that's how like the recap is. It's just like an expression of myself, I guess.
Got it. So, as the next section, I want to talk about some of your videos. So, I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions, some of the videos. So, if you could explain to everybody your first four videos, or how, okay, so South LA recap, what you just thought of the title and was like, okay, or was that discussed within, like, how did that come up?
Oh, I don't have my
Because
journal
the
with me.
first four series were
Uh-huh.
about South Central or South LA. Could you kind of go over that?
Yeah, sure. So, to be fair, when I was sitting at Magic Johnson Park, thinking about what I could do with my skills, and that's when the recap came up. So I came up with like a bunch of names. What's up, South LA? the South Central Journal. I have them all written
I like that
down.
one too, South Central Journal.
That one could work. And hey, if someone else wants to jump into this game, feel free to take this or any of the other ones. I think the original name was actually the South Los Angeles Recapitulation.
Oh
And that
wow.
was like me just being just kind of like, I think that was like a little sarcasm, like, oh, it's going to be like super fancy. And then I was like, South Central recap. And I'm like, that just doesn't really sound right. And I said, South LA recap. And I'm like, oh, that kind of has a ring to it. I actually like that a lot. And I said, oh, it's probably going to make some people mad. And I think in that first part of that series, I had no idea what was going to be the right name. So I was like, I called this the South LA recap, and I could totally be wrong. And the next couple of episodes can actually be the South Central recap.
Ah, so you were open to both.
I was open to both, and I just wanted to. Now I've sort of settled on South LA, and I think
Mm-hmm.
that's just been based on a lot of research that I've done. Um, and I think that series kind of like channels a lot of it. But yeah, at first I was definitely open to both, and then I'm not opposed to what. So I know there's several other people on Instagram that might use South Central, and I'm not opposed to that at all. I just think for branding, I was like, I think I just need to stick with one just so
Mm-hmm.
everything's more
Right.
consistent.
So it started because the sound of it sounded good. South LA recap, the
Mm-hmm.
flow of it, right?
That's
So
how the
can you
name.
explain what you did in that research to try to figure it out? Because I didn't grow up in South Central, but I always knew about South Central. And if most people listen to the Central Avenue podcast, I kind of say the reason of why it's just always been South Central. Just again, it's been always portrayed as that in the media, and maybe I didn't really see when that change came about until you explained it. So how did you find the research, or what did you do to kind of get like the audience to fill in what they thought about what it would be called?
Yeah, I think so. The first part of the series, so I divided it in four parts. There was one like a people's choice, another one that actually looked at a brief history of the region, another one that analyzed the usage of the terms South LA and South Central over time, and then the last one, I think I just kind of summed it all together. So to sum up this research, the first part, I asked people which one did they prefer on a couple of South LA groups. So just like getting a feeler on Facebook. And a couple of the polls, I think one got 40. There was very little difference between like the winning mark of South LA or South Central. South LA tended to have when people would comment on their choice, they would say South LA sounds like a gentrifier. Other people really like South LA because it's kind of like gave the region a new lease on life.
Mm-hmm.
Other people preferred South Central because that's what they grew up with. Typically,
Right.
people that grew up with like in the 80s,
Yes, older people like me.
late 70s and 80s, like it's South Central or bust. People born before that and then after the 2000s, they tend to be a little bit more ambivalent on choosing between South Central or South LA. So that was the first thing. So I got a lot of people that thought South LA were stupid, other people that liked it. Next, I looked at the region, and then I looked at the one of the original neighborhoods in the South LA region, which is historic South Central, which was bounded by Flower Street to the west, Washington Boulevard to the north, Central Avenue to the east, the main corridor and the main Black corridor there,
Mm-hmm.
and I believe Vernon to the south. Um, and it was called South Central because it was literally the streetcar ran down Central Avenue. That was where the businesses were, and that is at the time it was like predominantly Black. That's where a lot of the Black business was happening. So everything South Central, that main corridor, kind of took over that whole neighborhood. LA is big, it's sprawling, and it has grown from that tiny neighborhood into 24, 25 other neighborhoods.
Right.
But that name, however, I've learned in later research, um, was that South Central was very specific to that neighborhood, but the region in itself was really divided between Southwest and Southeast Los Angeles. Southwest
Yes.
Los Angeles, which I've covered in my 110 history video, and I've also covered in the Village Green, was really like a
Yes.
working class white neighborhood.
Yes.
And the southeast part was well, let me say middle class. The Southwest was more middle class. Southeast, the southern part of it was working class white people, and the northern part of the Southeast region was working class people of color. Um, in the 80s, a lot of issues were happening with South LA. We had the drug epidemic, the gang issues, rise in crime, and South Central tended to be that particular neighborhood. There seems to be a series of misreporting that happened. That from that neighborhood, a lot of journalists ended up describing the whole region that way. So to bring it
Mm.
back, we looked at the People's Choice, we looked at the history of the region, and then we actually looked at the Google Ngram, which shows how often like South Central and South LA were used. South Los Angeles goes back to the 1900s. South Central doesn't really peak or isn't really seen on a graph until about the late 70s. So it's
Wow.
like there's an early usage of South Los Angeles, typically Southwest or Southeast Los Angeles to make that differentiation,
Uh-huh.
that was used for decades. And South Central was this new thing that was, in a sense, kind of derogatory to the region, and through the research, it's like misinformation of the region. However, pop culture has made South Central a prevalent thing, a thing
Right.
that many people have accepted, and I don't think that it's right to ignore that reality.
Right.
So that's why at the end of the day, like I'm all about the research, and the research really points to the region originally being called South LA. And I think that's encompassing of everything from View Park, Windsor Hills, all the way to Willowbrook, all the way to the Florence Firestone community to the east. And I think that it's an accurate representation. South Central is something that is really special to a particular neighborhood, but has grown to sort of describe a lot of the region, particularly the southeast, anything east of the 110 freeway or east of the main street. Particularly that was used for South Central, but as we know, a lot of people like to use it for the whole region, and I don't think that there's anything wrong with calling it, but with calling the entire region that, it's up to you. But for me, if you were to ask my preference, it would actually be South LA.
So South LA, but then there's the other part where we're also like not calling it Green Meadows or Florence and Firestone or Vermont Corridor. Like we're not even meant, like that's totally missed now, right? It's like we said earlier, it's all lumped. Would that be too difficult though? Like to start just calling that neighborhood by what it is, or is it just something that, because for example, in Long Beach, there's Bixby Knolls, but there's Signal Hill, but it's kind of Long Beach still, but they still have like a more of an identity.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I understand like there's a, in some of those cities there's mayors, their own council and all that stuff, but these little regions are very small. Like how big do they stretch out? Like a few, would you say a few miles? Like the Green Meadows area, for example.
Yeah, I don't have those numbers on hand, so I don't want to speak about that, but most of them aren't very large.
Okay.
Um, Most of them have like maybe just tens of thousands of people in them. They're not very large. The whole region itself is 16 square miles and is large. And I think to answer your first question, there's nothing wrong with saying like South LA or South Central when you're talking about the entire region.
Mm-hmm.
I always try to do my best to, like within my work, to recognize particular neighborhoods. But that neighborhood pride, like I kind of learned in New Orleans, really comes from the community members. You have
Okay.
to be in your community and you have to really take ownership of it. The Baldwin Hills community, for one, everybody knows South LA, But then everybody also knows Baldwin Hills. Everybody also knows Lamert Park. And there's a lot of community force behind that where you
Right.
recognize this is a neighborhood. People don't know much about Green Meadows. In fact, a lot of people mistakenly call it Watts when Watts, the boundary of Watts, starts on Central Avenue and Imperial. So it's too far west to be considered Watts, but that's another story. So
Wow. Yeah. That's a great
again,
point.
right. And Watts has a super cool history. And a lot of people at one point was its own city. It was annexed in Los Angeles in the 1920s. And still to this day, there's still a lot of camaraderie around that. And I don't know
Right.
if that's because of news reporting or because people can actually feel like this part of LA is different than the rest, different than Vermont's Slauson area, different than all other sort of regions in South LA. So starts with the community.
Yeah, that's a great point because you're right. Leimert Park has like a really strong community presence. Uh, Baldwin Hills, I have heard of that separately too, and of course Watts, which I was going to tell you that you're. I never considered Watts being part of South LA. Not that I know it's like right next door to it, but I did see it as its own city, even though I know it doesn't have a mayor, council, or none of that. But it's just still seemed individualized as Watts. And when you said in your video that it was its own city at one point, it kind of makes sense why it still has that aura of its own city, even though now it's just part of South Central South LA, which I didn't know. So that's really interesting. So yeah, the community, and there is a community that is kind of trying to pop up a little stronger is the Florence and Firestone, because there's a Instagram page somebody runs. I'm pretty sure you've seen it where they're trying to highlight the community, save some of the buildings there. So I could see how if you do have more of that stronghold or people like kind of having some care for it or pride, it could have more identity.
Definitely. And they like that, like Florence Firestone, for example, is an unincorporated neighborhood. So they have like LA Sheriff, they don't have city services. They do have a beautiful nature park right on Slauson and Compton,
Mm-hmm.
I think. And but yeah, they again, they're really proud of their community and they're proud of the stuff in it. And that's what it
Yeah.
takes for people to recognize you outside of the bigger region. And quite frankly, most of our community, most of the neighborhoods in South LA don't have that strong, I guess, level of pride behind it to really sort of separate it from the South LA, South Central narrative.
Yeah. Uh, and then just came to mind with the Florence and Firestone. Maybe there's more of a people that are involved in trying to push to save some of the buildings there. But it reminded me of another region and an Instagram page called Jefferson Park 323. Do you follow them?
I think I've seen their posts. I can't. I'll likely follow them. I'm sure.
So yeah, so this person is wanting to highlight this part, right? This Jefferson West Adams area, in
Hmm.
a sense. I know part of it touches South LA, and I know other part is more LA. So there's like some boundaries there, but he likes to highlight a lot of. I think it's a he. I don't know. The person likes to highlight a lot of that USC area, the Figueroa area. So but I mean that they're doing it because they probably care for that area or live there. But that's just maybe one person. But yeah, you're right. Community wanting to bring highlight to these regions, it definitely is important. Now that the way that you explained it, I could see that now for sure. Okay, thank you. So, and like I was gonna say, the other part about Watts was I didn't know about was that it was its own city at one point and then switched out. So that's really great. So just some facts that you posted on your video. In South Central, population is 750,000. Is that correct?
Yeah, that was at least a 2000 census. I haven't seen the newer ones,
That's a
but
lot.
it's a lot of people. It would make it like the 17th most populous city on
I
its
just
own.
didn't think it would be that many people. I mean, I know LA is crowded, but like that, just that part, like wow. And then you mentioned 25 neighborhoods, which we've been talking about, and then three unincorporated communities, which let me see if I remember. Willowbrook, the Baldwin Hills now, and it was it the other one, the Firestone, or was there another one?
So Willowbrook, Florence Firestone, not Baldwin Hills, but View Park Windsor Hills.
Okay. And that sounds so fancy.
Oh, it's extremely fancy. I think it's truly fancy LA, and like they probably don't want to be considered in the South LA region,
That's
but
what
they're
I'm saying.
not.
Do they embrace that or no?
They embrace more of like the Culver City, uh, Baldwin Hills. There's another city over there I can't think of, but they sort of embrace that more. But
Uh-huh.
when we're talking about area planning, they fall in the South LA region.
Okay, got it. And also with Willowbrook, my husband grew up in Compton, so he Willowbrook is kind of meshed in with Compton. So it was never like so separate for him.
Right. Yeah, because they use a lot of Compton. Like it's so easy to cross over to Compton, and it's also easy to cross over into South LA too. So it can probably feel a little different.
Yeah, so and then the unincorporated part, like I knew what it was in a sense, but never really fully until you explained. Could you explain what unincorporated is to the audience? Just because when we hear unincorporated LA, like what does that mean? Why does it sound so lonely? Like what's going on? Tell us.
Yes. So anything that's incorporated, almost like a business, has like a sense of leadership. So,
Okay.
like Incorporated City of LA, we have a mayor, city council making directives. The mayor and city council are directly responsible for the city. And typically it comes with some good perks like city services and the city address. An unincorporated community is a community that is overseen typically by a county. So there's no direct level of leadership. It doesn't have a mayor. It doesn't have a city council, but then it's also not annexed like legally into another city. So it's
Mm.
obviously its own separate community, but the county tends to take the burden on services. For example, you call 311 to do bulky item pickup in LA. Um, in Willowbrook, you call 211, and the county has a bulky item pickup that's not as good, but it's still there. And then there's other like smaller things. And the biggest thing would be like the biggest thing would be the difference of police force. So again, an incorporated city will have a police department, LAPD, Inglewood PD, and such. Um, Unincorporated tends to use the sheriff, again, falling on the county to provide essential city services rather than having the city do it itself.
I know the library system too, right? The county
Mm-hmm.
library versus
LA,
city library.
right, exactly. So that's a county, right? They have county libraries. There should be a branch in Willowbrook, but it's not a part of LAPL. So there's like small differences, but very interesting to know if you ever like want to buy a home or rent somewhere new.
So if they wanted to make a change, like let's just say in their community, they would have to go to the board of supervisors instead of like a city council meeting.
Exactly.
Ah, okay. So that's a great explanation because we hear about it, but it's like kind of no, but it's good that to break it down, especially because some of these unincorporated cities are right in the middle of LA surrounding it. So it's like why? Like maybe we don't know why that happened. Maybe one day you'll maybe you know why, but how it just separated, but
Yeah, that's something I would definitely have to look into. I just I don't know. Maybe I think you can always ask to be a part, and maybe there's like a liability to be a part of the city and they don't want to take it. I don't know why. That's more tax revenue.
urban
I never
planners,
figured.
please tell us.
That is a conversation for an urban planner, definitely.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so as you know, at Beyond the Facade, we talk a lot about architecture and history, of course, and you bring up a lot about you bring up a lot of architecture discussion in your videos. One of the ones that were pretty interesting was when you brought up not like for art aesthetic purposes, but the Charles Drew University. So it's really nobody really knows about that because you said it's one of the first black colleges, and I'm like, what black college in South LA? Like, huh? I remember seeing that long time ago because it's right across from I work in mental health, and there's a Augustus Hawkins mental health clinic there, and it was across the street. And I think Martin Luther King is too, right? And I think there was a controversy with the university. I'm not sure. I heard something, but I never really. It's never really like it's not USC where we know USC. They have so much pride and even UCLA or whatnot. So what is going on with this Charles Drew University? Like, why is it so low key? Like, why is it still even active?
Yeah, that one's interesting. I actually reached out to them during the height of the pandemic. So they're definitely active. And for MLK, a lot of their doctors or their doctors to be, or I'm not really sure how you really define it in medical school
So
field,
it's a
but
medical school.
yeah, so it's a medical school that also does like other certifications, like with the nursing and lab tech.
Okay.
And a lot of them end up participating at the MLK hospital.
Like interning and whatnot.
They'll intern and do their rotations, and
Okay.
so there's a big partnership of that. So that school is very different. It's a black college, but it's technically not a historically black federally recognized historically black university because it was built after a certain threshold.
Okay.
But for just simplicity's sake, it's still a black university in South LA that I believe I need to double check this. I'm not actually 100% sure without looking at my notes, but part of it was in response to or around the time of the Watts Rebellion in 1965. I believe they were built just before.
So it's a modern building then. I can't
Yeah.
remember how it looks fully.
So still like a modern building. It's kind of the campus kind of like blends into the MLK hospital. So like that whole
Yeah.
area has kind of like the similar feel. Architecture is definitely not my strong suit. One of my content creator friends or blogger actually, Aton does LA. He does a lot of that stuff. I think his dad is an architect. And
Okay.
he'll tell me all about like the buildings and its design and the inspirations behind it. And me, in my I guess simple self, I'm just like, it's a building.
I'm gonna ask you some architecture questions though. I'm gonna ask you some architecture questions. And
I'll try to answer
and I'm
them.
not an architect myself. And this is kind of the point of my page and podcast because not all of us are architects, but we could, teach a little bit at least of basics, the basic
Right.
foundation. And, you know, we could maybe learn from what architecture you might like that's historical architecture, maybe not knowing everything, but it's okay. We're all learning here.
Right.
So the Charles Drew is still active, and I thought that was just interesting, like because it's kind of low key, like I said, it's not kind of out there like maybe USC or whatnot. Of course, USC's a whole different story, but it's just interesting. But the way that you said that it was built because of the rebellion, I guess that makes sense, or around that time.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing, architecture wise, which is not significant architecture or anything, but you mentioned a few times in one of the videos or two that there's no Target at in South LA until they put one at USC at the where do they call that area right there?
That's just University Park at the USc Village.
Okay, so the reason that was interesting because I had gone to USC for the dental school like maybe 3 weeks ago, and I had to park kind of far, so I was walking. I think it's on Hoover, right?
Mm-hmm.
The And I seen there's a Trader Joe's. I'm like, what the heck? Trader Joe's, like, I'm gonna go in there because I'm walking by it. Let me just grab some stuff. And I seen that there was a Target there, but I didn't know that was there. Maybe I hadn't driven by. The area is not accessible so much in a car. You got to be probably a student walking around. It's easier. Most people probably wouldn't go shop there necessarily because it's inconvenient as far as car parking and whatnot. But when was that built? That area right there, and Why wasn't there a Target before? And I don't know if that's a pro or con. Let's just say.
So there's a few things. So one, it was actually on TikTok. Someone actually corrected me. So technically speaking, there's one other Target in South LA, and I missed
Okay.
it. But I don't really consider it very accessible. It's on Obama and La Cienega. Um,
What
that's like
what neighborhood is that?
that is so it's like almost next to Kennethon Park. I believe that will still be in the bounds of Baldwin Hills.
Okay.
So it's like it's there, but it's like west. I mean, you're
Really?
almost like
Yeah.
about to hit West LA at that point.
If you're living on Central and Slauson, you're not going to go to that Target.
You're not gonna go there. You're gonna go down to Inglewood.
You're right.
Um, so that was the first thing. The second thing is so the USC Village is extremely interesting. I remember going there as a kid, and it was completely different. I'm not sure if you had the chance to go like in the early 2000s. There used to be
No.
oh boy,
I thought it was
this
like a new thing because USC's been building and
no.
building.
So they built on top of a village. So this is like the craziest thing. So USC used to have the village, and it was a place. It was a food court. They had like things for the college students. There used to be a bike shop, a
Okay.
Radio Shack, a Denny's, even a Superior grocery store. And
Oh,
this was
wow.
like really like the old South LA kind of mixing in with the USC. Whatever the case, in the mid 2010s,
Okay.
uh, they wiped off the whole thing. There used to be, I can't remember if I just said this. There was a movie theater, Flagstaff movie theater. I used to
Oh,
go
I didn't
there,
know that.
$5 movie tickets during the day. There was a movie theater.
Can you let
Crazy.
people know what are the streets that are bordering this
Sure.
village?
So this is between Hoover, Jefferson, 32nd, McClinic, starts with an M.
Okay.
So it's a street that ends. It's not a major street in South LA, but really Hoover and Jefferson and 30 seconds. If you're around there, you're gonna be right at the front of the village. So all
Ah,
of that stuff was there. Superior, Radio Shack, a lot of stuff, a couple of food courts, I believe. If not at Panda Express, a pretty tasty Chinese food restaurant, American cuisine Chinese, and they wiped it all down. It was all flat level. There used to be a surface parking lot. Wiped it all down. Gone. Erased from history.
And
Done.
what year was that? Do you know?
I don't know offhand. I know it's in the mid 2010s. It was when I was off to college, and
Okay.
I came back, and my mom was like, "Oh, I'm gonna go to Trader Joe's. You want to come?" I'm like, "Where's there a Trader Joe's right here?" And so we go, and I'm like, "What is this? Where are we?" She was like, "Oh, this is the village. They built a 2-story underground parking lot. It's 2 levels underground. It's all brick. It's in that USC
Yeah.
plastic
Yes, the
brick.
USC.
They could use some more colors, but whatever. Like I said, not an architect. And you go in, and there's a Trader Joe's, an Amazon locker, a City Target, Trejo's Tacos, a couple of other eateries, and I think a Starbucks just opened, and
Yeah.
Dulce Cafe, which is like one of my favorite chain cafes, all opened in there. So it's crazy because it erased like this whole part of USC that a lot of people knew and was really for the community, and then really kind of changed it into an enclave. The community is still available to go in. Parking is free for 2 hours as long as you're
Okay, good to
validated in one
know.
of the stores.
Mhm.
Um, Parking is on 32nd Street. Go to 32nd Street, turn in. You don't have to park on the street. Free parking for 2 hours. And yeah, it's crazy. So it's new. So this is like within the last, I want to say within the last 7 years, this thing was built,
Oh,
and it was
wow.
built on top of something that already existed and served the community.
Wow. So, you know something, I didn't know that until again I was walking through there, and to me, and I love Trader Joe's. I'm not hating on Target or Trader Joe's, but to me it I thought it was part of campus living, like
Hmm.
USC campus living. I didn't know that it was part there was I couldn't imagine like if there's another shopping center there. It just USC built another area for their students. Does it? Yeah, I didn't know. So that's interesting.
Yeah, I think a lot of people like. people used to, if you didn't really grow up around there, you probably wouldn't have an idea. And quite frankly, it's like most people probably don't want to spend their day hanging around college students. However, I think it's great for a lot of people that do live in South LA that because
Yeah.
of this college living situation, there was actually some investment that can kind of benefit your community and at least make life a little bit easier.
No, yeah. I mean, I'm glad it's there for the community as well. I thought initially it was just part of the campus, an extension of it. Just because you as we see USC has been growing and taking over a lot of spaces all around there.
Oh yeah.
So it just felt like the same way, like, oh well, cool, I like it, but I didn't think like maybe, your tia or your uncle down the street was gonna go there, for to buy something. But now learning from that, you used to go there as a kid when it was something else, makes sense. So as far as architecture style, you did bring up some architecture styles. I think you mentioned some in your videos. What do you think is your favorite kind of? Okay, first, what kind of architecture style do you see a lot in South Central? Because you did mention that there are a lot of style of homes in South Central that have different styles, and you did mention a few. So is it majority mixed? Is it different depending on the region? Like, what's the kind of like a main theme that you do see, or maybe if there's not, what kind of styles do you see? Vintage styles, at least.
So I think so again, like architecture is not my strongest suit. So if I were to talk just simply about it, my favorite architectural style is Spanish colonial.
Revival.
Or
Yes,
yeah,
I love it
yes.
too.
I love the revival. And you can actually find like a lot of those like sparse throughout South LA in
Yeah.
different neighborhoods, Green
Hmm.
Meadows, in like the neighborhoods around Normandy. You'll find them. And I don't know, I really love the homes are like super small, but I just really
They're
love them.
cozy looking and cute. I don't know.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
like secretly, like that's the kind of house I want if I actually had a
Hey,
choice.
Matt, you could try to get it, yo. It'll happen.
Uh, maybe when I'm 50.
I know, right?
And it's funny because when I look at a lot of the houses in Southeast Los Angeles, which I'm probably more familiar with, they were all like really built around factory life. It's funny, you see these
Ah,
factories like Florence Firestone is a good example of this. Green Meadows in between, like around 108th Street, is a good example of it, where you just see like these giant factories being built up. Another one is by Fremont High School, and you have homes that were just they're just like these cookie cutter homes. They don't have like any built-ins. It's just like a house with the bathroom and 2 to 3 bedrooms and maybe a living room. And it's like a simple house. And you see so many of those, and they're all like situated, like packed like sardines right next to each other. And it's like you can kind of see, like, when the area was being planned, people were to work at the factory and then go home, eat dinner with their family, and then come back to work, walk to work. And it's like you just see like all of these homes packed like sardines all across
mm,
Southeast Los Angeles. And it's not until you get to the west side and or Southwest Los Angeles do you start to see more spaces in between the homes, and then more like architectural styles like craftsman,
okay,
which you can
yeah.
find like around like Western and King, not too far from South LA Cafe. You can find like a ton of craftsmen there down Normandy. But typically on the west side, you'll see like some of the more fun homes. Southeast, cookie cutter homes meant for factory
So
workers
like
to
no
go home.
style per se.
Very little style. Just and I think you could probably call it a bungalow. I'm not again very like
No,
up
that's a
on
good way to look at it. Just a simple bungalow.
that's it. That's all it is, and that's like half of South LA. The other half you can find some really cool stuff.
Yeah, and I know I love the historic South Central. There's a lot of Victorians scattered
Hmm.
around there still,
Hmm.
or like early 1900s, houses still made out of
Hmm.
wood. So I do see a lot of that. So yeah, I mean, that's a good explanation of the type. And again, you don't have to know architecture at all. So whatever you're saying is perfectly fine. um, so As far as another thing about the Watts, that this is what I was going to say originally. I didn't know about the Watts train station. I don't even know where it's at when you explained it. I can't picture where. You could kind of maybe paint a picture for us, sort of.
Sure. So, do you know where the Watts shopping center is?
No,
Where
give me
the
some
Food
street.
for Less, right on 103rd and Grandee.
So 103rd.
So
Usually when
right.
I can't think
Hmm.
of it right now because usually when I go through Watts, I'm going down by like Nickerson Garden, the Imperial Court, kind of like the
Yeah,
set.
so you're on the Imperial side. Yeah.
Okay.
So if you go on it's like on the 103rd, that's like where the neighborhood center is. They called it a civic center too. I guess you can say that. And that's like where like the SoCal gas station is, the Rainbow Store, the library. It's all sort of like in that area, not too far. It's in between like Compton and Wilmington
Okay.
on 103rd.
Okay.
And it's right there on 103rd, and Metro has a platform that's built right next to the Watts train station. Um,
Which is
uh,
it's not near the freeways. It's just the Watts exit, like on the metro,
yeah, so the blue line. The
the
blue
blue line.
line, I can't remember what letter it is, but the blue line has a station right there. It's 103rd and Watts station. And
Oh
it's like
yeah, I do know that the blue line station.
right.
Okay.
So if you like right next to the station is an orange building, and it looks like it's just nothing's going on, and that's because that's true. Nothing's going on. And it's kind of boarded up, and then you can kind of see where it was renovated in the 80s, but definitely it was unkept.
Oh.
I'm actually working with Aton on a joint video where we're talking about this because it's a National Historic Landmark and one of the oldest surviving buildings, and one of the few surviving buildings on 103rd Street after the Watts Rebellion. It was built in 1904.
Oh wow, that does definitely go way back. So you guys are coming up with a video kind of highlighting that.
Yep. So
Nice.
we're going to publish that one on August 11th, and which is right about the time of the commemoration of the Watts Rebellion.
Oh, okay, that'll be great. We'll look forward to that. So yeah, I guess I don't really ride the blue line, but growing up I did, and I never noticed it. I can't think offhand if I ever noticed that building. But now with a different lens, I do want to take the metro to downtown, and I'll definitely be looking out for that.
Definitely.
So yeah. So another funny video I was gonna say is when you talked about the alleys, and the reason was because I always was curious about gated alleys. Here in Wilmington, there was some gated alleys, and I was like, why are they gating the alleys? That's kind of weird. I kind of knew why, like I guess the stuff going on. I get it, but it was just kind of like I don't know. I just thought that was messed up in a way because I get, yes, there's stuff going on, but then like you lose out on having access, like if you live there, right? For the most part, because you're
Yeah.
not gonna really open that gate all the time. I don't know. This just seemed weird, and I seen like a surge of that. These alleys being gated in LA. I know Watts has some that are gated, and I was always like attracted to them because graffiti, like it was like, oh man, they look like they're like little low key, like because they started getting overgrown, some of the alleys with like
Hmm.
rubbish and weed and stuff, wheat, and then I don't know, it just seemed weird. Like I didn't really understand why they were just gonna rather just gate them and like forget about them and not really do anything with them. Then I did hear when they were doing something with, I don't know if you remember, where they wanted to do something with the parkways in South Central, like make farms or gardens, like the
Hmm.
sidewalk and then that piece of land between the sidewalk and the house that people, I guess, belongs to the city, that was just kind of like let go or discarded. They wanted to do gardens and the city really didn't want that. And they had mentioned the alleys as well, but I never really heard much about it after. But what and then I learned a lot from watching your video on the alleys. Like the reason that what they were used for at one time, and now I live in a place where I have an alley in the back, and the trash is picked up in the back. It's not in the front. And you know how you said that they hide the poles, telephone poles, and trash. That's a pretty nice idea, right? And right here, there hasn't been a lot of. There's nothing going on that there was shut down the alley, but I guess that's happened in LA. So tell us what made you spark that interest in these alleys, and then maybe you could explain to the audience, like they could go watch the video too, but maybe a brief on these gated alleys.
Yeah, definitely. I think the reason it sparked something is because I lived behind one for like a really long time. So I'm trying to figure out like, okay, there's trash in here. I make a report, and then the city is like, oh, we don't do gated alleys. And I'm like, why not? And they're like, they're not ours. And I'm like, who said that? And of course, like, I'm like, so what's going on? So I'm heavily researching, and I find just a series of articles from the LA Times talking about residents who were fed up with trash and illegal activity and explicit activity going on in their alleys. And the city was fed up because 65% of its bulky item pickup was illegal dumping, or 65% of cases of illegal dumping were in South LA alleys alone. So
Yeah.
they were like, okay, fine. We'll pay a contractor to build an iron gate that was not treated with like, well, I guess it was initially treated with paint, but no one talked about its upkeep. And they said, we'll gate up your alley. We'll clean it up one last time if all the residents agree to take care of it, and we'll give you a key to the lock. And the residents were like, okay, cool. I want to
At
stop
the time?
at the time, which
Okay.
is cool because you made that decision for how you want to live, not
Right.
necessarily for the people that are after you. So the people who came after them inherited this gated alley problem, and
With
there's
probably no key, right?
a lot of them don't have keys. I've hear some cases. You should definitely look at the comments in that video. There's some neighbors who like hoard the key. They're like, I'm not opening it for
Oh
anybody.
my
There's
God.
other alleys that just have the gates flung open all the time, and LAPD will happily go through them if they're looking for somebody, but the city will not enforce anything inside of them. Um, and I've actually reached out to Council District 8's office several times about this, and it turns out there's no solution to reverse the process that's actually written down. There's a series of
Wow.
things that you can do, but nothing written, nothing for residents to follow to say, like, hey, I want to rethink this because I did not make this decision, and I need the city's support to help keep public property clean. So, just for the audience to keep in mind, in the 1990s, the city rolled out a nuisance alley conversion project, which
Mhm.
listed out that alleys tended to have a lot of illegal dumping and explicit activities, and residents could opt to, again, get a gate and close off their alley for good, with the exception of the city would no longer be responsible for anything inside. And for a lot of people, that sounded good. There was one family that owned a church not too far from where I lived that had the alley, at the gated alley, and I asked them about when they decided to get it, and they thought it sounded like a good idea at the time. They had all the support, and it turned out that the people who wanted to get inside the alley just ended up using bolt cutters to cut the locks, and eventually they cut them so many times that they just like left it open. It just
Yeah.
wasn't a point. So now you have an open alley with zero support. So anyway, I can get heated for my own
No,
experiences,
it's okay. I love
and
to hear that.
right, and for several other people that again walked into it, they bought these homes that have this, and then yet there's no literature around
It's
them to
so
educate.
unfair in a sense if you can't make
Definitely.
a change.
Yes.
Yeah, so it sounds like the people that initially fought for this, maybe they're not living there anymore, or probably they just, I don't care about it anymore. I'm not gonna keep up with the weeds or painting the gate. Like they kind of gave up on it, or they're older. I don't know. Um, but also like aren't there garages on the back where they need
Yep.
access? Like they're not using the garage, or
It all
is it?
depends. Some people built driveways in front of their homes. Typically, homes that have alleys didn't have driveways.
Right, like where I live, there's no driveway. It's in the back.
Right. And then like the asphalt that's on the in the alley, the city's not responsible for it. The residents actually have to pool together money to fix it, which would be cool if South LA wasn't a typically working class community where
That's what I was saying.
people.
I think they went over their head on what they might have could afford to do,
Right.
even, you know.
So I see it as the city like explicitly and advertently conned people into not taking care of public property. I think it's one of the worst moves, and I think
Yeah.
people were conned out of their alleys.
Yeah, and it's also like a goes to almost a kind of like bars on your windows in South LA, South Central, bars in the alley. It almost gives you a message like this place is gonna always stay dangerous. Like, and it just continues that stigma, right? As far
Mm-hmm.
as all of that. So, and or continues to keep, people thinking, it has to be this way. There can't be changes. So
Yeah,
yeah, that's an interesting controversy, and I don't know. I mean, hopefully in the future something could change with that. But what a waste, they're just kind of just shut down or if open. And like on my other curious side is like, who's taking their time to like get bolt cutters to like break the gate? Is it because they wanted to like go into the garage, or they just wanted to chill?
sometimes to chill, sometimes to park their car illegally.
Oh, okay.
Well,
Did you
there's
ever did you ever play in the gates while you were a kid, or jump in there or anything?
not really. My grandmother, I spent a lot of time with her, and she was like not about playing anywhere where cars were like remotely close. But I do remember seeing kids playing soccer in the alley, and I would sometimes wish I could play too. But
Yeah, I feel like I would be somebody to try to climb in there too and go and play. So yeah, that was a really cool. So if you guys definitely once you go to his channel, watch that video on South LA alleys. Um, I was also really really taken back about all the hiking trails that you mentioned, the Stalker Corridor Trail and the View Park. That's where it's at, I believe.
mhm.
So that was really cool. I'm like, oh, like that's just a part of a South LA I don't really drive by often or go towards. So that's really cool to see that. And then you did a really kind of funny video. Again, I love you kind of have a humor in a sense when you're telling I don't know if you consider that. You have some kind of humor. You're not like laughing or anything, but you have like a tone
Yeah,
that's
I'm very
funny.
kind of dry sometimes with it, but yeah, I find a lot of it funny, and I'll be sarcastic a little bit,
Yes,
a
you
tiny bit.
mentioned the most expensive rental, and I was laughing because it was a rental where it was $3,000 a month for a 3 bedroom in the '60s area, and you're like, it has a Home Depot remodel, because I always say that too, like this cheap Home Depot remodel. It's just you could see it, right? And it was right off Figueroa, and you mentioned Figueroa with the look in your eye a couple of times. I know what you meant by that. Everybody knows what that means. But that was a little bit much. $3,000 around the '60s and Figueroa for a Home Depot remodel. I think people are taking advantage of that one.
Definitely, and I've also learned that sometimes that's done purposely, like they'll still advertise it, but if they accept Section 8, which some of these places do, they're able to get like top dollar for their rental with the federal government subsidies. So
Mm-hmm.
that has a lot to do with like why you find one bedrooms like $2,200 in South LA. It makes no sense, but
So they want to get the Section 8 to pay
so,
all of it.
so
And then
either right.
that's
And then
kind of shady
and
a little bit, you know?
it is, and then the rest of the market kind of catches up too because they see other rentals going for that high price,
Oh
and it
man,
kind of like
yeah.
shifts the entire market. Like I just
Absolutely.
why is there a $200 difference between living in South LA versus like somewhere on the west side? There's something that's not that's
And they
not
probably
right.
it's probably not illegal then, huh?
I mean, you can price it at whatever you want, but the market really dictates it, you know. And I think COVID
Yeah.
kind of there was a dip, but again, I guess LA as a whole is just expensive.
Yeah, because I know some of the apartments kind of on Figueroa by USC, not like the student ones, but kind of like more like the older buildings, even some of the ones from like the 20s, some like are kind of really like run down or whatnot. But there's been a few that's one bedrooms are pretty high and they look kind of like it's an old building. I mean, it's decent, but it's kind of expensive for what you like. It's not like across the street from USC. It's still on Fig. I mean, there's different parts of Fig, but you know, the part that we love, I think it's a little bit high.
Yeah, it's just expensive to live in this city. It doesn't matter where it is. People see LA in the title and they're just like, I will pay whatever to live here.
Yeah, and I think people who grew up here are like, why? You know, I don't know. I think it's mostly outsiders that really feel like, so, oh my God, LA. Yeah. So another video that you talked about, Wetland Park. I didn't know about that park. That was pretty cool. I don't even know. I can't even imagine where it's at. If you could just say like the region it's in, Wetland Park.
Yeah, so that's actually in the South Park neighborhood. Fun fact, there are two South Park neighborhoods in Los Angeles, one in downtown,
Oh yeah.
like around Hill and
Uh
11th,
huh.
and then in South LA, right in between Avalon and San Pedro. That park is in between Avalon and San Pedro, and I always get this messed up. 55th and 54th,
Okay.
around that area. I could be off by a block.
So the 50s
Mm-hmm.
is Wetland Park, which I thought it looked really nice, and then like the hiking kind of part to it too. With that,
Mm-hmm.
I seen people like enjoying it, so that was cool. Another one, I know the last video you did was Sloss and Swami, which was awesome. But you mentioned the controversy too with the Sloss and tracks, where it's kind of going to be a hiking or a walking path to the river, but it hasn't happened, and there's no train tracks because they did that part, but they're like 5 years behind or something.
Yeah,
Are
taking
they
out
ever
the.
gonna do it? I don't know.
So they actually just had a groundbreaking about maybe close to a month ago. And by groundbreaking, I mean the political officials went down and had a couple of shovels and said, like, hey, we're doing the thing. And nothing has changed pretty much. Metro is expecting a deadline of, expecting a completion date of 2024.
Okay.
No, they also said the K line was supposed to be done in 2019 and it's 2022. So take that as you will.
Yeah, and I had learned about that from a friend that works in the construction arena, and she was telling me about the plans to renovate that. And I don't know if you know the movie Boys in the Hood.
Mm-hmm.
Remember the scene where they're running down the tracks? I think they see a dead body. It's right by the Slauson. It's not on the Slauson tracks. It's another like alleyway down on the other side on the Slauson side where the Slauson swap meets at. There's another like alleyway or that had a train. And maybe it connects, but it's not the one directly on Slauson. It's kind of on the side of it,
Mm.
where all the factories are at and stuff. Right near the Slauson swap meet. There's a what is it? Western right there that crosses the Slauson swap meet. Slauson
Uh,
and
Slauson and Western, and then Normandy is the next main street.
okay, so right below Western, there's another like track that was. She said there's plans to like can probably connect that pathway to the Slauson one, and that's where they film Boys in the Hood. That scene where they find the dead body, and it goes all the way down to like Bud Long, like all the way down there. And
Mm.
I know it from graffiti because it was all bombed up and graffiti wise. And one time I went to her house and we walked it because she was sharing that it's going to be a walking path. And you probably should, if you watch that movie again, watch that scene so you could kind of see the before and after. It's very interesting. I love seeing before and after movie scenes, but um I did walk through there, and that was like maybe 4 years ago where she was saying that, and now it makes sense
Mm.
that not much has happened. But it would be cool walking paths, just to have there, because they were just train tracks that were kind of just discarded. And I mean, it was fun for graffiti writers, but I mean, we loved it. But as far as community, it would be nice to see that in that community. So hopefully the groundbreaking continues and doesn't take another 10 years. We'll see. So I loved your history on the Watchtower. That was pretty cool. I didn't know that it was from 1921 when he started it. That was like, wow, that's pretty cool. And then just like you mentioned that they saved it, so that was a good history. And then just some of the high schools you mentioned, George Washington High School was one of it. And then the prep, was that the prep school, George Washington Prep School, or
Yep,
was yeah?
that was prep.
I thought that was weird too, how they had portraits of the kids outside the building. Isn't that kind of odd? Like the graduates, they have pictures, or were they just for graduation? They had pictures.
I actually don't know what they were thinking. I was like, oh, this is here, and I could work this into my B-roll. I'm like, nobody touched them, I guess, so that was good.
I would feel like people would cross them out or like add a mustache or something.
Yeah,
I don't
it
know. I just
was.
thought that was weird.
Yeah, you need like a wall, and it should be inside the school. But hey, everybody does something different.
Yeah. Where exactly what street is that school on?
Normandy and Tinker.
Okay. So more towards on the other side of the 110.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I
So,
love
yep.
the history of
Mm-hmm.
schools. So when you mentioned it was an all white school and then it started changing, it's interesting because same thing with Jefferson when I brought that one up before. Was it Jefferson? Yeah, the one right there off Central, the Art Deco one. Thomas Jefferson High. Yeah, in historic South Central.
Okay.
But it used to be a classic revival building. In the 33 earthquake, it got torn down. Now it's Art Deco, a streamlined building.
I did
And
not know that.
yeah, it's awesome. And it's known for to a lot of known jazz musicians came out because it was close to Central during that time. But before that, it used to be an all white school. Well, it was all white teachers, and then all the students were black, but all the teachers were white. So finally, one of the music instructors tried to teach there, and he was the first black one. But before it was interesting how the schools had that definitely that racism, and whether it was staff or like what the students. But I love that how you highlight the high schools. Um, so I was telling you when we first started, some of the food blogs that you do with your wife, pretty interesting because you're right. Like maybe if you live in South Central, you think about where to go eat there, but if you're living outside of it, like, and you want to go pick up some food or maybe have a date or something, you don't really say, I'm going to go to South Central to go pick up a sandwich or whatnot. Like, you might go to downtown, you might go to Echo Park now or like Long Beach downtown. So, you highlighting these places was really cool. I liked how, and then the coffee houses you brought up, the Watts Coffee House, that's super hidden. I didn't know about that one. And I like how you highlighted the tamales de Elena, like the street vendors. So that was really cool.
Mm-hmm.
Ca- Café del Mundo, I've been there once. Very delicious. I love it's kind of in a low key area though. It's off Vermont, but it's like low key around there. Like it's
Yeah.
kind of alone.
You have to look for it. You don't just like drive up and be like, oh, there goes Coffee Del Mundo. It's like, oh no, you knew about this. But
Yeah,
John, the owner, I think he's been there for 3 years now. Such a cool guy. And that Vietnamese iced coffee, so good.
nice. I haven't been there in a while because their hours are kind of short. They
Mm-hmm.
close really early, and maybe because it's a small business. But I definitely, when I went, he knew how to make a good iced coffee that's not all
Oh,
super sweet or anything. So I liked
yeah.
it.
Yeah.
And then one thing that was interesting was when you and your wife went to Paloma Mercado for some food there. Okay, I know technically it is in the vicinity of historic South Central, but I never really considered it historic South Central. It was like more like downtown-ish, even though it's not close to it. I just didn't see it as a place in South Central that I considered it that until you brought it. Like, yeah, this is a food eatery in South LA. So thank you, but I just always seen it more like, oh, it's downtown, more downtown
And
connected.
I think that because it's like right next door or right across the street from the DMV, and I think that's like the LA or like downtown DMV.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
totally get that too. And it's like if you go down Grand Street, you probably don't even think to like look of something like that. But that place is also like really cool and has some like neat restaurants, and the community center is doing some great things. But yeah, I always like, I think my channel is always about technicalities. I'm like, yeah, it's in South LA. You probably didn't think
No,
about it,
that's
but
good. It's just educating us. It's definitely educating us. So, just before we wrap it up, I just want to know, get some insight on like the how you're creating your work. I noticed that your videos are pretty short, but they're digestible. Like they're you get to the point. They're not like 2 hours like maybe my podcast is. So if people listen to my podcast, it's because they really are into the thing, and that's okay. But some people might not be able to sit there or through a whole video or anything, right? So it's did you do that on purpose? Like make them short to catch attention spans?
yeah, I would definitely like to make longer content. And in fact, most times my original scripts for all my videos are actually longer than what the video actually is. Typically about 2 to 5 minutes longer.
Okay.
And I cut out stuff and I'm like, oh, I really want to share this, but I just like to keep it direct and make sure that the audience is engaged and each piece of information is moving them forward into a particular direction. So they have like a really clean understanding versus like all these little branches.
And I think for people maybe like me that are into histories, like I want it to be longer, right? I'll sit there and hear it. But I know that for the more mass, especially younger audience, they have a hard time paying attention to maybe something so long. So if you're like into a niche type of thing, then by all means, an hour video is going to be amazing. But yeah, that's good that you're able to at least get to the point, even if it's short.
Yeah, I think definitely in my future, and I started it this year about making longer content. So when I first started the recap in 2020 and 2020 in the early part of 2021, I was making content like every week. I was like, oh, I'm gonna be a YouTuber. There's like new stuff every week. And it was cool. And then like there were times where I'm like, oh, I really want to spend more time with this, but I felt like there was this expectation to keep posting. They were like, this is how you grow your channel. It's like, okay.
Yeah.
And then at the end of 2021, I actually kind of stopped that weekly posting. And I was like, I'm going to take some more time because it just takes a lot of time to research and to look in and
That
to make
was
sure
my
the
next
video.
question. How long does it take you for some of
Oh,
these videos?
it depends. So like Village Green, that was like maybe 200 hours.
Wow, that is a
Of,
long. Yeah.
and then maybe like another 50, probably about between 200 and 250 hours, like 18 minutes, but like there were a lot of hours just researching. And so like at the end of 2021, I decided to reduce my cadence. So now it's like once a month, but then my last few videos have been like heavy hitters. So they're like, you wait a while for them, but then I actually like really have a chance to make them like really cool and people actually kind of enjoy them, I think, a bit more.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. So that was kind of to piggyback on that. Just as far as the process of your channel, like as far as do you have a studio? Do you have a what kind of equipment are you using? Did you start off with just a phone, or did you already have a camera and all that? Like maybe for somebody that's interested in knowing the technicalities of that.
Definitely. I started off with my iPhone. So
Okay.
if you look at my first videos from December 2020 to like October, all shot on my iPhone, every single part. Now I have a smaller camera. It's like a ZV-E10. It's by no means like a big camera. And I use my bedroom as my studio. My wife makes me tear down all of my equipment because she
Yeah, I
doesn't
gotta
want to
do that
see it.
after too.
She's like, I don't want to see it. And I'm like, yes, ma'am.
One day we're gonna have a room
Yes.
specifically for that.
For
Okay.
this, where I can leave my microphones up so I'm not always
Yep.
readjusting them. And my light. So I'll spend like 30 minutes just setting up my lights and my camera and stuff. And it's okay. It makes the room look cleaner. And yeah, it wasn't until like October 2021 that I was like, oh, okay, let me make this investment. Even today, I shot some footage of the watch station and I used my phone for about 85, 90, not my phone, my camera for about 85, 90% of the time. And then my phone I ended up using about 10% of the time. There's just one thing I was thinking about is like a lot of my videos, even the Sloss and Swap Meet, some of that was shot on my phone. And it's kind of cool because some places aren't really keen on you videotaping. And when they see like a real camera, they think you're going to like
Yeah.
make
They're all
like,
paranoid. Yeah.
right. They're like, oh, he's going to make a real movie. And then I've gone places with my phone and people don't even bat an eye. And then it's like, they don't know that I'm like making these movies on the internet.
Right.
But sometimes you need to be a little bit more inconspicuous so you can get that story across and so people aren't bothering you.
So you're editing everything yourself?
Yes, I edit everything myself. I do my audio. So I have a ZV-10 shooting at me, some lights. I also have a Zoom recorder. It's a handheld recorder.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And take in my audio, and then I splice everything. I take my screenshots and my documents and everything, and I put them all in Adobe Premiere. And then that process usually takes like a week. And then I'm usually like, it sucks and I want to stop. And then I just want to shout out, my wife is like a big help for me to even go this far. I've wanted to quit several times.
Oh, wow.
And she's been the one like, no, you're not quitting. You need to keep going. Grow up.
So she's motivating.
Oh, she's super motivating. And she'll like watch my stuff. Like when I did the Sloss and Swap Me one, I wasn't even happy with it. And I'm like, I think I messed up. And then she looked at it and she was like, no.
Yeah, that's great that you have her support.
Yeah, so I can't. So I would say like I do not do this all by myself. If I did, I would not be here today.
Yeah, and maybe later, if you do get bigger, then maybe you could pay somebody to edit, as they all supposedly do, right?
Yeah,
because I'm still learning as well, and the audio editing is easier than video. So my friend happens to be a documentarian, so he helps with some of the editing as basic stuff, nothing, just something to be able to get on YouTube real quick.
Mm-hmm.
And I said I was going to learn it myself. I just haven't been able to have the time to learn it and do it myself. But is a goal as well. So.
Yeah. If you ever want some pointers, just let me know. I'd be happy to meet up and show you.
Yeah, that would be great. I'm trying to get new stuff right now as far as laptop and everything. So that is the goal. So it's just as far as researching a topic, are you digging into primary, secondary sources? I see you do a lot of field work. So do you have like a process of steps that you take? Like you go here first, then here, then here?
Yeah, so typically I actually start all of my stories, like I'll have an idea for a story and I'll start on Wikipedia. And I know people are just like, what? But
that's a no. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Right. And definitely the written part is a no. I always start and look at the sources that they use. And you can find
what's up.
You can find some really interesting stuff. And then you're like, oh, okay. Like I'm always reading Wikipedia. And then if I don't see a number next to that statement, I'm like, okay, that's probably not even true.
Yeah.
So I start there. And then after that, I'll dig on like newspaper.com and see what kind of periodicals.
So are you paying for the subscription?
Yes.
It's expensive. Hood historian's like, I'm paying $60 or $7 every 6 months.
Every 6 months. And there are times like these moments when I'm not making videos, I'm like, I'm not paying for it. I'm like, I'm going out to Jersey Mike's and buying a sandwich. I'm just not paying
I
$20 for this
know.
month or $60, but I'll do it. And then,
I
yeah,
know.
it's such a helpful resource.
It is. It
Hate it.
is.
I hate that it's so helpful because it's expensive.
I know. And you can't
And
get it free anywhere. It's kind of
no, no, you can sometimes get it at the library, but it's no good. And then, like in Los Angeles Public Library, you can look at ProQuest. I think ProQuest is a mess. I don't like using it, but there are some resources there you can find.
yeah,
And
like the not to cut you off, but yeah, ProQuest. But if you want to do like something like more of like newspapers.com, you have to actually go to the library,
mhm,
and that might not be as easy.
right. So it's not, and then like the USC Digital Libraries is also a good resource.
Yeah.
Um, the Los Angeles Public Library e-media resources are good, like their Tessa database where you can search for old photos and stuff. Those are also pretty good too.
Yeah, no, for sure. So it sounds like depending on the video, it could take some weeks, or it could be shorter. The Village Green was really interesting too. That I didn't really know about that area so much. So that was a great, and it was a longer form video. As far as interviews, are you reaching out to people too and getting people to share?
Yeah, so that's part of like I kind of break up my work into seasons. So season 1 was like all the way from like December to October. That's where I was kind of learning. If you kind of pay attention to my videos, I've like been learning in steps. So like some of my early videos, I don't use any music and I will cringe when I watch them now. I'm like, it's so dry. And
We're
then
learning. Yeah.
we're learning. And then the second season, I started using more music. And then now, like, I think Village Green is like my third season. So this is where I'm like, okay, I got the story. I have the historical proof. I'm like, now let me get something to kind of really add to it. I make sure everything is sort of like just I have documents or some sort of visual evidence to prove it. But I also find that like pulling this information from people rather than telling it can be more engaging. And I really learned that from like Village Green and the Sloss and Swap Meet. I think those two are like really good uses of interviews. They just take a long time to secure and they
Yeah.
really
No.
slow down projects, but they
Yeah,
make it
that's
worth
true.
it.
Yeah, no, that's true. Okay. And then just Instagram. I mean, I know that you were focused on YouTube and you kind of left the Instagram more just once in a while, I guess. And now you're maybe posting more. Was it just something that was not as interesting to, or are you trying to work more with the Instagram?
I hate Instagram. I
you
hate
be,
it.
you could be real. It's all good.
If I had nothing to do, if I felt like Instagram is still good because like there's definitely people like you who've kind of like mastered it, or I think mastered it, and you have developed an audience, and I find it a lot harder to engage audience with Instagram. But
Yeah.
then I also think it's still an avenue to help people learn more about South LA. There's space for audience growth, and I've seen it on TikTok, I've seen it on Instagram. So I've decided, I'm like, well, let me start posting like once or twice a week. And then I actually got my little brother to help out. So he's actually like on my Instagram monitoring stuff and is
Okay.
posting more. So I'm like creating the content, he's posting and he's engaging. And then we've kind of seen some growth there and on TikTok. Between the Village Green and the Sloss and Swap Meet, I got a growth of like 170 subscribers
Awesome.
doing nothing, but
Yeah.
really just like engaging on these platforms and people finding it. So I find them important. If I had a choice, I wouldn't use them, but I still think they're necessary.
Yeah, hopefully we see you more on Instagram or at least on Reels or something.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so you mentioned one future project with the other YouTuber. Any other future projects or like that you want to mention or goals you could share before we wrap it up?
Yeah, definitely. So this watch train station is my first collaboration video. So definitely open to collab. So DJ, if you want to jump on a collab, just let
Ah,
me know. We could do something. Instagram,
yeah, plan something
YouTube.
out.
I'm all for it. This was really fun working on that. My next main feature, a lot of people have been asking for high school, so it's Verban Day High School. Um, and they had like a fire basketball team in the late 60s and early 70s. And they have such just a cool history. It's a high performing school in Watts that has been doing great things for decades and still exists. So I think it would be great to highlight that school. I have a script, I locked it in, and then I finally got some interviews that I can possibly confirm. So
Cool.
once I get these interviews in, it's going to be kind of longer, like Village Green, but I think it's
Mm-hmm.
really going to serve a purpose.
Nice, nice. And then I see that you if people from your audience want to hear a feature, they'll reach out to you and give you ideas.
Oh, all the time. I always tell people, just comment, leave a comment. I read my comments every day. I don't get a comment every day, but I'm always like
Yeah.
looking for one. And there's been a ton of good ideas. Benny Espinoza was the one that recommended the Wrigley Field video.
Oh,
And that
okay.
was like one of my favorite videos. I had no idea about Wrigley Field until he mentioned it. And then once I dug in, I'm like, oh, this is a story.
Yeah, that was a cool one too. So, any shout outs to anybody or any or just let people know where they could find you on all platforms?
Yeah, definitely. Shout outs, definitely my wife. I want to shout out my little brother Zed for managing my social media,
Yeah.
my mom and my dad, um, and then just the community around it, just like you on Swap Meet Chronicles, like really doing the thing and reaching out to do this awesome podcast and
Yeah.
really kind of connecting people like me and Hood Historian and
Yeah.
really kind of showing like, hey, there's people that really like find interest in this stuff and are like
Mm-hmm.
really building up the community. So I really appreciate the
Yeah,
work
no
that
problem.
you're doing. So
Thank you.
love this podcast, love what you're doing. And but yeah, if anyone wants to learn more about the South LA recap, you can visit southlarecap.com. You can type in Google South LA recap, that my YouTube channel and website will come up. And my email is there. So if you want to connect, you find something interesting, shoot me an email. Go ahead and leave a comment on my YouTube videos and love to be in touch.
Yeah, thank you so much. So, thank you everybody for listening to this interview. And if you want to find the podcast, is on Beyond the Facade podcast on Instagram. My personal page is Swami underscore Chronicles on Instagram. I am more Instagram heavy. We do post the videos on YouTube, probably after the audio version of it because I'm still learning. So everybody has their niche, right? So it's all good. And Sabrina, which is my co-host, hers is observing spooks and other vices. She does a paranormal element to some of the places that we talk about. So you could find her on there. But other than that, and thank you for coming, and we'll see everybody else on the next episode. Have a good day.